Good evening and welcome. Here is today's news wrap and update for September 5th, 2024. President Biden traveled to Wisconsin today, to Welby, Wisconsin today, to highlight his economic agenda and announce new investment in clean energy. The White House said this morning that the president will announce $7.3 billion investment in clean energy for rural community in Wisconsin and across the U.S. As we reported tomorrow, the president, today's visit is part of the Investing in American series that the president kicked off at the White House on Tuesday. And tomorrow he will travel to Michigan tomorrow as part of that series in the next coming weeks. And speaking of investments, in Africa today, the U.S., the Biden-Harris administration, released data yesterday that showed its investments on the continent since 2021, since the Biden-Harris administration came into office. The data show more than 12-fold increase in investment in Africa from the U.S. Of totaling $63.5 billion over in 41 African countries over the past 3 years plus. With 401 deal value at $3.5 billion in the last 6 months alone. As we know, the president gathered African leaders in the U.S. in 2022, December 2022, for the U.S. African Leaders Summit, and several deals were announced during that period, and the president pledged to invest in digital technology, in infrastructure, and also to engage more with African leaders and through the African Union, and he has done that in the past 3.5, continued to do that in the past 3.5 years. So this investment is sort of a receipt of what the administration has done in collaboration, in partnership, working one-on-one, and changing the narrative and changing the way that U.S. deal with Africa from humanitarian. Even though the humanitarian aspect is still there, the administration continue to invest significantly in humanitarian support. Humanitarian effort on the continent is the largest contributor to humanitarian assistance in Sudan, for example, in Chad, and other area. The U.S. just announced new donation for the Mpox outbreak in Congo, in Democratic Republic of Congo, and it donated 110,000 Mpox vaccine alone to Nigeria to take care of the outbreak in that country. So this, as the Special Assistant to the President and Director of National Security Advisor for Africa, Francis Brown, said in remark that under the President Biden leadership, our engagement with Africa is not only about numbers, but about sustainable inclusive growth. And this increase in close trade and investment deal over the past 4 years signify our all-in on Africa dedication to long-term and lasting partnership that support our shared prosperity. Of course, as we reported again, when the president came into the office in 2021, the first remark that he delivered was to the Africa Union, virtually to the African. That was during the COVID-19 pandemic, that the global economic was still being taken care of. And the first remark that the president delivered was to the African Union summit that was taking place, pledging to renew the friendship between the U.S. and Africa, the friendship and the partnership between the U.S. and Africa. And in the past 3.5 years, this data show that the administration have kept that promise and continue to invest. And as we said, in 2022, the president brought back the U.S. African Leaders Forum and invited several African leaders, over 40 African leaders, to the U.S., where they gathered in Washington, D.C., and several deals where private sector deals were signed, as well as the government pledge to invest significantly. $55.5 billion investment were pledged to Africa. And in the past couple of since then, from Secretary Blinken to Secretary Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, the Commerce Secretary, as well as First Lady Dr. Jill Biden and the Vice President Kamala Harris, have all, including other senior officials, have made several trips to the continent in the past since 2022, just to renew the partnership and the engagement with Africa. Even this week, several several senior officials are participating in the African Food System forum that is taking place in Kigali, Rwanda this week, and several new investments have also been announced through the USAID Feed the Future to invest more in food security, $40 million in food security for African continent. So those are just some of the deal, and this deal also include, I probably have mentioned this, also include the Lobito corridor that was announced, that it will be expanded through Tanzania now. That the president see as a way of improving trade and investment, as well as connecting Africa to the global trade and global economic. Through the Lobito corridor that we go from the Democratic Republic of Congo to Angola and Zambia, and now expanded. And this will include, is not just a railway system, it will include trade, small medium enterprise trade, women trading in those areas, just to be able to pass goods and services from that area, from those countries, along through the Atlantic Ocean and into the U.S. and into other countries around the world. This, of course, also is part of the G7 leaders initiative that the president brought to the table, and engage other leaders from around the world to support this effort as a new way of engaging with Africa. So this data, as I said, show the receipts of what this administration have done in the past 4 years, in the past 3.5 years that they've been in office, of changing the narrative of how the U.S. and Africa engage. And speaking of engagement, this data can also come as African leaders, several African leaders gather in Beijing this week for the China African Forum, which takes place every 3 years. This is the first time, as we reported, that event is taking place since COVID-19 pandemic. And the U.S. and China are both competitors in everything, and they are the number one and number two biggest economics in the world. So this event and having this data as a way to compare what both countries and how both countries are engaging with Africa as a whole, and who is bringing Africa all in and bringing Africa to the table. Some of the other things that the U.S. government have done is, ensuring, campaigning and advocating for more engagement, including inclusive Africa at the global table, including at the G7, alliance, as well as the United Nations Security Council calling for a permanent seat for African nation. As I said, the Beijing Forum is a way of China engagement with Africa, and in these couple of days, the forum kicked off yesterday through tomorrow, September 6th, and is a way for the Chinese to boost its influence on in Africa as trade and as well as its political influence. This also come as a lot of some African countries, at least 9 African countries, are in debt distress due to loans that they've taken from China. Despite the fact they are still engaging, looking for way because, as we know, there is a lot of needs in infrastructure needs as well as trade needs for the continent as a whole, and China have been delivering some of those, and as we reported this data show that the U.S. In the past under the Biden-Harris administration have significantly stepped up U.S. efforts and engagement with African country. So moving to another story that we have focusing on the and speaking of U.S. investment and engagement in Africa, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, the DFC, formerly known as OPIC, announced that he has joined the IFC, a part of the World Bank, and Propacor and the German Development Finance Institution have all partnered together to provide loan to a pharmaceutical company in headquarters in South Africa, Aspen. The U.S. will invest $122 million to life-saving medicine and vaccine in Africa. This investment couldn't come at a better time, as we've reported with the Mpox outbreak on the continent across 12 countries or across the continent right now. So, and African leaders have been working with partners in the EU, the US, with the African CDC to respond effectively to curb the spread of the outbreak and end the outbreak of the virus. And speaking of the Mpox virus, the World Health Organization announced yesterday that today, that September 5th, that the Democratic Republic of Congo will receive its first batch of vaccine today, and they can begin vaccinating people in the country. So the other story, moving to our other story that we are talking about, we are focusing on, this is a U.S. travel ambassador. Lapenn is in Cote d'Ivoire. Traveled to Cote d'Ivoire this week and to meet with government officials to discuss partnership on mutual issue, including environmental conservative. She will also attend the 10th special session of the African Ministries Conference on the environment. And speaking of environment and investment, the gathering today, we've been reporting about this throughout this week, that the African Food System Forum is taking place in Kigali, Rwanda. And today, the International Fund for Agricultural Development announced that it plans to increase its financing for Africa to 60% over the next 3 years, and 45% increase in core projects, again, to train youth and SME and as well as women in food security, in food development and design. And again, this is part of investment, the global world focus on providing more financing. As one of the leaders said in remarks today, that Africa is the food basket, and if it's ignored, and if investments, private sector investment has public sector investment, both domestic and global and internationally, do not pay attention to what is going on the continent, the rest of the world we also go hungry. The last story that we are focusing on that relates to Africa, Secretary Anthony Blinken is on a trip to Haiti this week. In the next couple of days, actually travel there. As we know, Kenya is the lead peacekeeper that regarding the crisis, the war that is going on in Haiti. So the Secretary of State will be there meeting with Kenya's soldier and Kenya leader to see how they can bring an end to the crisis in Haiti. I believe the president Marine One just arrived. You can hear the helicopter. If you can hear the helicopter in the background, so the president just returned from Wellesley, Wisconsin, and we will see if we can. There's a way that we can sneak in there, and you will see that report tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Kemi Oshipoya. I will see you tomorrow. Have a good night. Marine One approaching, you can see it's around the monument, approaching the White House. President returning from a day trip to Wellesley, Wisconsin, where they announced, highlighted part of the Investing in American series, and the president announced a $7.3 billion investment in clean energy for rural communities. When the president left this morning,
deal yet? Do you have a deal yet? Do you have a deal? Deal or no deal?